My name is Carol Jean Hutchins, and I want to start by telling you something that took me 53 years to understand. The most dangerous thing a woman can be in this world is useful. Not smart, not beautiful, not rich. Useful. Because once the people around you understand that you will always show up, always give, always solve, always sacrifice, they stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a resource. And resources do not get birthday calls. Resources do not get thank you notes. Resources do not get asked how they slept or whether their back is feeling better or what they dream about at night. Resources get used. And when they run dry, people look at them with a kind of irritated confusion, the way you look at a faucet that has stopped working, and they say, "What happened? I thought this was supposed to keep giving." I was born in 1958 in Greensboro, North Carolina, the oldest of 3 children. My father was a textile worker, my mother a seamstress who did alterations out of our kitchen on weekends to make extra money. We were not wealthy people. We were the kind of family that understood the value of $1 in the specific, practical way that only comes from not having very many of them. I learned to stretch ground beef with rice. I learned to hem my own jeans. I learned that gratitude was something you showed with your hands, not just your mouth, and that love was a verb, something you did, not just something you felt. I moved to Charlotte at 21 and got a job as an administrative assistant at a mid-size insurance company called Piedmont General. I was good at the work. I was the kind of employee who noticed what needed to be done before anyone asked, who stayed late without being told, who remembered that the regional manager liked his coffee with exactly 1 sugar, and that the HR director had a shellfish allergy, and that the filing system in the back office was 3 years out of date and needed reorganizing. I reorganized it on my own time. That was just who I was. I met Robert Hutchins at a church picnic in the summer of 1981. He was tall, quiet, funny in a dry way that snuck up on you, and he worked as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant outside the city. We dated for 2 years and married in 1983 in a small ceremony at First Baptist with 63 guests and a reception in the church hall. My mother made the cake. It was the best cake I have ever eaten, and I have eaten a lot of cake since, trying to find something that comes close. Robert and I had 3 children. Marcus, born in 1985, Denise, born in 1987, and our youngest, Tanya, born in 1991, who came into the world 6 weeks early and spent the first 3 weeks of her life in the NICU while I sat beside her incubator and made deals with God that I have been paying off in small installments ever since. All 3 children were healthy, all 3 were loved, and all 3 were raised in a house on Clover Street in a neighborhood that was not fancy but was ours, where Robert mowed the lawn on Saturdays, and I grew tomatoes in the backyard, and the kids had a trampoline that was always broken and always being fixed and never quite right, but that they loved anyway. Robert died in 2009. A stroke, sudden on a Thursday evening while he was watching the news. He was 54 years old. He was sitting in his chair, the brown recliner he had owned since before we were married, the one I had tried to replace twice and he had refused to give up both times, and he made a sound I had never heard before, and by the time the ambulance arrived there was nothing to be done. He was gone before Friday morning. I want to tell you who I was the day Robert died, because it matters for everything that comes after. I was 51 years old. I had been with Piedmont General for 30 years, having worked my way up from administrative assistant to office manager to director of operations for the southeastern region. I was good at my job, and I was paid reasonably well, and I had a pension coming, and a life insurance policy on Robert that paid out $240,000, and a house that was nearly paid off. I was not a woman without resources. I was a woman who was about to make a series of decisions that would leave her, 14 years later, sitting alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in Charlotte on her 65th birthday, waiting for a phone that did not ring. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Marcus first. Marcus was 24 when his father died. He had graduated from UNC Charlotte 2 years earlier with a degree in business and had been working at a logistics company downtown. But he had never quite found his footing in the way that some young men do not when the world turns out to be harder than they expected. He was smart, my Marcus, genuinely sharp, good with numbers, quick to understand systems and patterns. But he was also the kind of person who always had a reason why the current situation was not his fault and why the next opportunity was going to be the one that changed everything. After Robert died, he came to me within 3 weeks with a proposal. He wanted to start a small transportation business, contract trucking, and he needed capital to get it going. He had a business plan. He showed it to me on a laptop at my kitchen table, and he talked about it with such conviction and such detail that I found myself believing every word. I gave him $40,000 from Robert's life insurance. Marcus shook my hand at the kitchen table very formally and said, "Mom, I'm going to pay you back every cent plus interest. I promise you that." He looked so much like Robert when he said it, the same jaw, the same steady eyes that I had to look away. The business lasted 14 months. There were reasons. A contract that fell through, a truck that needed repairs that cost more than expected, a partner who turned out to be unreliable, a market that was more competitive than the research had suggested. Marcus came to me when it ended and told me the story with the calm of someone who has already processed his grief about something and moved on, and I sat there and listened and did not say what I was thinking, which was $40,000. Instead, I said, "What do you need now?" What he needed, it turned out, was help with rent. He had been living in an apartment with 2 roommates, but the roommate situation had become complicated. One had moved out, the other was unreliable about his share, and Marcus was looking at a 1-bedroom that was $1,200 a month. Could I help, just for a few months until he got his next thing going? I said yes. The few months became 8 months. 8 months became a year and a half. By the time Marcus found steady work at a distribution center and started paying his own rent, I had given him an additional $22,000 in rent and living expense support. I told myself this was what mothers did. I told myself Robert would have done the same. I told myself Marcus was a good man going through a hard time and that the investment in him was an investment in the future. I was not lying to myself exactly. I was just not telling myself the whole truth, which is a particular kind of dishonesty that women who love people too much are especially skilled at. Denise was different from Marcus in almost every way. Where Marcus was outgoing and optimistic and perpetually about to succeed, Denise was careful, methodical, a little guarded. She had studied accounting at NC State, passed her CPA exam on the first try, and gotten a solid job at a mid-size accounting firm in Raleigh. She seemed, of all my children, the most settled. She had a boyfriend named Trevor who was pleasant and steady and worked in pharmaceutical sales, and they had been together for 4 years by the time Robert died, and everyone assumed they would get married eventually. They did get married. In 2012, 3 years after Robert's death, in a ceremony in Raleigh that cost $41,000 and that I paid for entirely. I want to say that number slowly, $41,000 for one day. A beautiful day. I will grant that Denise was stunning in her dress and Trevor cried when she walked down the aisle, and the venue was a restored barn outside of Raleigh that glowed like something from a magazine. But $41,000 that came from Robert's life insurance, from the money he had worked 30 years to leave me so that I would be comfortable. Did Denise ask me to pay for all of it? Not in so many words. But there was a way the planning unfolded where I became the one who was called when a vendor needed to be paid, the one who was consulted when the budget expanded, the one who filled the gap every time the gap appeared. And I filled every one of those gaps because Denise was my daughter and I loved her, and it was her wedding, and what kind of mother would I be if I did not? After the wedding, Denise and Trevor settled into a life in Raleigh that looked, from the outside, like everything was fine. Trevor's sales job paid well. Denise made good money at the firm. But there were things I did not know. Trevor had a gambling problem that he had hidden from Denise, and by hiding it from her, he had also hidden a significant amount of debt. When it came out, 2 years into the marriage, Denise called me at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night and told me everything in a voice that had gone very flat and very controlled, the way her voice always went when she was holding herself together by force of will. I listened. I told her I was so sorry. And then I said, "What do you need?" What she needed was money to cover the joint credit card debt that Trevor had run up without her knowledge. $18,000. She had her own savings, but not enough, and she did not want to borrow from a bank because she was afraid of how it would look on her financial record, given that she worked in accounting. I gave her the $18,000. She thanked me and said she would pay me back, and I told her not to worry about it. Trevor went to Gamblers Anonymous, and Denise stayed in the marriage, and things seemed to stabilize, and I told myself the crisis was over. It was not over. 2 years later, the debt had come back, not as large, but present, and again Denise called at night, and again I gave what I had. This time it was $9,000. Then there was the car that needed to be replaced. I helped with the down payment, $6,000. Then the house they wanted to buy. I gave them $15,000 toward the down payment. Then Trevor's gambling came back a third time, bigger than before, and Denise finally left him and needed help with a lawyer, $4,500. By the time the divorce was final, I had given Denise, across 7 years, a total of $68,500. And then there was Tanya. Tanya, my youngest, my NICU baby, the one who came into the world fighting and whom I had held for the first time through the portholes of an incubator and whispered to, "You are going to be fine. You are going to be more than fine." The one for whom I had been making deals with God ever since. Tanya was 30 when her father died. She was the most like me in temperament, warm, giving, always taking on other people's problems as her own, and also the least stable financially. She had tried several things: a cosmetology program she did not finish, a job at a daycare that she loved but that paid barely above minimum wage, a relationship with a man named Devin who was charming and unreliable in equal measure. When Devin left, after 3 years, after Tanya had helped him pay for a car he drove away in when he went, she was left with a lease she could not afford and a credit card balance that had grown during the relationship and a broken-down heart that was maybe the most expensive thing he had taken. I paid the last 3 months of Tanya's lease, $2,700. I paid off her credit card, $4,300. I helped her move into a smaller place and paid first and last month's rent, $1,800. And then, when she decided she wanted to become a medical assistant, there was a program at a community college in Charlotte that would take 18 months. I paid the tuition in full, $6,200. I am not listing these numbers to make my children sound like villains. I am listing them because I never listed them when they were happening, and the not listing was itself a kind of lie I told myself. If you do not count it, it is not real. If you do not add it up, you do not have to look at what it means. Here is what it meant. By 2018, 9 years after Robert died, I had given my 3 children a combined total of $189,700. Nearly all of what Robert had left me. Nearly all of my savings. My retirement account, which had once held significant funds, had been drawn down to cover the periods when my salary alone was not enough to cover both my own expenses and what I was sending to the kids. I was 60 years old, still working full-time, with less financial security than I had at 40. And my back hurt. That is a small detail, but I include it because it is true. My back had been giving me trouble for 2 years. A disc issue, my doctor said, from years of desk work and stress. And I needed physical therapy that I was not going to because the copay was $30 per session, and I was telling myself I could not afford $30 3 times a week. I could not afford $30 3 times a week because I was sending money to my children. My birthday that year, 2018, my 60th, fell on a Sunday. I had mentioned it in passing to all 3 children in the weeks before. Marcus had said, "Oh yeah, we should do something." Denise had said, I know, let me figure out what's going on with the kids' schedules." Tanya had said, "Mama, I haven't forgotten, don't worry." I had made no concrete plans because I was waiting for one of them to make them. Sunday came. I woke up at 7, which is when I always wake up. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and looked at my phone. There were birthday messages from coworkers, from 2 women from church, from my cousin in Atlanta. There was a Facebook notification that several people had liked the photo my neighbor had posted wishing me a happy birthday. There was nothing from Marcus, nothing from Denise, nothing from Tanya. By noon, there was still nothing. By 3 in the afternoon, I had stopped checking my phone because the checking was becoming a thing that hurt, and I did not want to spend my 60th birthday hurting. I made myself lunch. a grilled cheese sandwich, and a bowl of tomato soup, which was what my mother used to make me when I was sick as a child. And I ate it alone at the kitchen table and looked out the window at the backyard where the tomato garden had gone to seed because I had not had the energy to tend to it that summer. At 6 in the evening, Tanya called, not to wish me a happy birthday. She had forgotten it was my birthday. She called to tell me that her car had broken down and the repair estimate was $1,100, and did I think I could help? I sat very still with the phone in my hand for a moment, and then I said, "Tanya, today is my birthday." There was a pause. And then she said, "Oh my God, Mama, I'm so sorry, happy birthday, I'm so sorry, I've been so stressed about this car." And then she kept talking about the car. I told her I would call her back. I did not call her back that night. I sat in my kitchen on the evening of my 60th birthday, and I did something I had not done in years. I took out a piece of paper and a pen and I started writing down numbers. All of them. Going back 9 years to Robert's death. Every transfer, every check, every payment I had made on their behalf. I wrote for over an hour. When I was done, the number at the bottom of the page was $189,700. I looked at that number for a long time. Then I turned the paper over and wrote, "Happy birthday, Carol. You are 60 years old. You have $31,000 in savings. You have a back that needs physical therapy you cannot afford. Your children did not call you today. What are you going to do about this?" It was the most honest conversation I had ever had with myself. I did not make any dramatic decisions that night. I did not send any angry texts or make any tearful phone calls. I went to bed at 10 o'clock, and I lay there in the dark, and I thought about Robert, who had loved me and worked hard and left me a cushion that I had spent on people who could not bother to call me on my birthday. I thought about my mother, who had hemmed other people's clothes her whole life and died with $11,000 and a dignity that nobody could take from her. I thought about the physical therapy I needed. I thought about the tomato garden I had not tended. I thought about the trip to New Orleans I had always wanted to take with my friend Beverly, who had been asking me for 3 years and whom I had always put off because something had always come up. And then I thought about the 60-year-old woman lying in this bed, and I asked her a question. "What do you want?" It was startling how long it took to find an answer. Not because I did not have wants, I had plenty, but because I had spent so many years treating my own wants as the last item on a list that never got finished that I had lost fluency in the language of my own desires. What did I want? I wanted my back to stop hurting. I wanted to go to New Orleans. I wanted to eat a meal that someone else cooked for me, not because there was a crisis, but just because it was Tuesday and I deserved a good meal on a Tuesday. I wanted to be called sometimes for reasons that had nothing to do with money. I wanted to be someone's first call when something good happened, not just when something bad happened. I wanted to stop being the floor that everyone walked on and start being the woman standing on it. I called my friend Beverly the next morning. Beverly Harris, who had been my closest friend since we were both new employees at Piedmont General in 1979, who had retired 2 years before me and moved to a condo in Asheville, who called me every Sunday without fail, and who knew the shape of my life better than anyone alive. "Beverly," I said when she answered, "I need to tell you something." "Tell me," she said. Beverly always said exactly the right thing. I told her about the birthday, about the phone that did not ring, about the piece of paper with the numbers on it, about $189,700. I told her about Robert's life insurance and the business loan and the wedding and the divorce debt and the rent and the tuition. I told her about my back and the physical therapy I was not getting. I told her about the tomato garden. Beverly was quiet through all of it. When I finished, she said, "Carol Jean Hutchins, I have been waiting 4 years for you to say what you just said to me." "What did I say?" "You said you are done. You did not use those exact words, but that is what you said." I thought about it. "Yes," I said. "I think that's right. I think I'm done." "Good," Beverly said. "Now here is what is going to happen. You are going to call a financial advisor this week. You are going to call your doctor about that back. And in March, you are coming to Asheville and we are planning that New Orleans trip." I did all 3 of those things. The financial advisor was a woman named Sandra Kirby, who came recommended by a colleague at work. She was in her late 40s, practical and direct, and when I laid out my situation for her, she listened without interrupting and then said, "Okay, here's where you stand and here's what we can do." She did not say, "How did you let this happen?" She did not say, "You should have known better." She said, "Here is where you stand. I cannot tell you how much that mattered." To be seen clearly, without judgment, in the full reality of what I had allowed to happen. That was a gift I did not expect from a stranger in a financial planning office. What Sandra told me was that the situation was serious, but not hopeless. I had my pension coming from Piedmont General, which I was 5 years from collecting. I had Social Security, which I could begin at 62 at a reduced rate or wait until 67 for the full amount. I had the house, which had been paid off and which was now worth considerably more than we had paid for it. And I had $31,000 in savings, which was not nothing, though it was nothing like what I should have had at 60. "You need to stop the outflow," Sandra said. "Whatever you are currently giving to your children, it stops now, not gradually, now, and you need to start treating your retirement like the emergency it is." "They will struggle," I said. "They are adults," Sandra said, not unkindly, but clearly. "They will figure it out the way adults figure things out, and you will not be able to help them at all if you end up at 70 with nothing." I went home that evening and I wrote 3 letters. One to Marcus, one to Denise, one to Tanya. I wrote them by hand because I wanted them to feel the weight of what I was saying. Each letter said essentially the same thing, though tailored to each child and to our specific history. It said, "I love you. I will always love you. I am proud of the people you are in your best moments, and I need you to know that I am no longer able to provide financial support, not reduced support. Not support with conditions. No support. I have done the math and I should not have to do the math. It should have been obvious long before now, but I am doing it now because I have to. I have given the 3 of you, combined, nearly $200,000 since your father died. I have done it because I love you and because I thought that was what love looked like. I am learning at 60 that love does not have a price tag, and that money given out of guilt or fear or the desperate need to be needed is not love. It is something else. I wish I had understood this sooner. I am understanding it now." I mailed all 3 letters on a Wednesday morning. Then I drove to the physical therapy clinic and made an appointment. The responses from my children came in stages. Tanya called the day she received the letter, crying and apologetic and genuinely upset, not angry, just scared. She said she did not know what she was going to do. I told her she was going to do what people do, figure it out. I told her I believed in her ability to figure it out. I told her I loved her and that love was not going away, but the money was. She cried some more, and I held the phone and did not fill the silence with reassurance, which was very hard but very necessary. Denise called 2 days later, more composed but with an edge in her voice that told me she was choosing her words carefully. She said she understood, that she respected my decision, that she wanted me to know she did not blame me. Then she said, "But I want you to know that some of the money you gave me was not optional. The situation with Trevor," I let her finish. Then I said, "Denise, I know, and I am not angry at you for any of it. But I need you to hear me when I say that I should have been asked, not just expected. There is a difference between someone asking for help and someone assuming help will always appear. I let that difference blur for too long." Marcus did not call. He texted 3 days after I guessed he had received the letter. "Got your letter, okay." That was all. I texted back, "I love you, Marcus." He did not respond. I did not chase any of them. I had said what I needed to say, and I let it sit. Meanwhile, I started doing something I had not done in years. I started tending to myself. The physical therapy helped my back almost immediately. Within 3 weeks, the constant low-grade ache that I had been carrying like ballast began to ease. I started going to bed at a reasonable hour and sleeping through the night, which I had not been doing because I had been lying awake worrying about money that was not mine to worry about. I started cooking real meals instead of throwing together whatever was fastest. I replanted the tomato garden in spring, and the tomatoes came back better than ever, as if the soil had been resting and was ready. In March, I went to Asheville to visit Beverly. We sat on her balcony overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains and talked for 2 days about everything we had not talked about in years. Not just the children and the money, but our own lives, our own losses, our own versions of the question I had asked myself on my birthday. What do you want? Beverly had her own version of this reckoning. A son who had borrowed money and never repaid it, years of putting everyone else first. And we recognized each other in the telling of it in the way that only people who have lived the same specific truth can. We planned the New Orleans trip for October. We booked it right there on Beverly's balcony, on her laptop, with a glass of wine each and the mountains going purple in the late afternoon light. I paid for my ticket with money from my own account and felt a specific kind of pleasure in doing so that I had not felt in a very long time. It was not the pleasure of generosity. It was something quieter and more personal, the pleasure of choosing yourself. Summer came. Marcus reached out in June, not an apology exactly, not an acknowledgement of the letter in so many words, but a phone call that was just a phone call. He told me about his job, a new position he had started at a different logistics company. He told me about a woman he was seeing named Patricia who seemed good for him. I listened and asked questions and did not mention money once. At the end of the call, he said, "Mom, how are you doing?" It was such a simple question. It was the first time he had asked it in longer than I could remember without it being a preamble to something he needed. "I am doing well," I told him. "My back is better. I am going to New Orleans in October." He laughed, a genuine laugh, unguarded. "For real, Mom, that is great." And he sounded like he meant it. Tanya found her footing faster than I expected. She always had more resilience than she knew. She picked up a second job at a salon on weekends to cover the car repair, and then paid off the credit card balance she had been carrying, on her own, over the next 8 months. She called me in September to tell me she had done it, and the pride in her voice was something I had never heard quite that way before. Not the relief of a crisis averted with someone else's money, the pride of having solved something herself with her own hands and her own discipline. I cried when I got off the phone, not from sadness, from something much better than sadness. Denise's road was harder and longer. The Trevor situation had left damage that took time to repair, and she went through a period of real struggle that I watched from a distance with a kind of aching restraint that required everything I had. There were moments when she called and I could hear how difficult things were, and every instinct I possessed said, "Fix it. Send the money. Make it better." And every time I heard that instinct, I heard Sandra Kirby's voice underneath it. "You will not be able to help them at all if you end up at 70 with nothing." And I held the line. I held it with love. I told Denise, "I believe in you." I told her, "You are capable of more than you know." I told her, "I am here for you in every way that does not involve money." And I meant all of it, every word. October came. Beverly flew to Charlotte, and I drove us to the airport, and we flew to New Orleans on a bright Thursday morning. And I want to tell you about those 4 days because they were, in a very specific way, among the most important days of my life since Robert died. We stayed in a small hotel in the French Quarter with iron balconies and a courtyard and music drifting up from the street at all hours. We ate beignets at Café du Monde standing up, powdered sugar falling on our coats, laughing in a way I had not laughed in years, the kind of laughing that comes from somewhere deep and uncomplicated, from pure present tense joy. We ate dinner at a restaurant where the bread was homemade, and the gumbo was the best thing I had ever tasted, and the waiter called us ladies, and meant it as a compliment. We walked through the garden district and looked at the old houses with their wide porches draped in wisteria, and I thought about all the women who had sat on those porches across the decades, and what their lives had held, and what they had kept, and what they had given away. We went to a jazz club on Frenchman Street on our second evening and stayed until past midnight, listening to a woman maybe 10 years older than us sing the blues in a voice that sounded like she had earned every single note. I sat at a small table with a glass of something cold and the music moving through me and Beverly beside me, and I thought, this is mine. This moment is mine. No one needed anything from me tonight. No one was calling. No one was in crisis. The music was just music, and the night was just a beautiful night in New Orleans, and I was just a woman sitting in it, alive and present and entirely, for once, my own. At one point, Beverly looked at me across the table and said, "Carol, you look different." "Different how?" "Lighter," she said, "like you put something down." I did, I said. About $190,000 worth of something. We laughed until the people at the next table looked over and smiled, probably thinking we were celebrating something. We were. We just could not have easily explained what. I came back from New Orleans and kept going. I kept my physical therapy appointments. I kept saving. I had a long conversation with Sandra Kirby in November about the house, whether I should sell it, whether I should stay, what the numbers looked like across different scenarios, and we made a plan together that gave me a clear picture of what the next 10 years could hold if I stayed disciplined. The picture was not lavish, but it was secure. It was mine. Those two words had become the most important words in my vocabulary, mine and secure. Not because I had become greedy or cold, but because I had finally understood that security is not selfishness. Security is the ground you stand on. You cannot help anyone if you have no ground. My 61st birthday came the following spring. I want to tell you about it because it was completely different from the year before, and not because my children threw me a party or made grand gestures or spent money on me. It was different because of something smaller and truer and more durable than any of that. Marcus called at 8 in the morning, just to say happy birthday. He said, "Mom, I have been thinking about you. I hope you have a really good day." He sounded genuine, unhurried, like a person calling because he wanted to and not because he needed something. He sounded like himself, like the boy I remembered before the weight of failure and the habit of being rescued had put a particular distance between us. Tanya showed up at my door at noon with a box of pastries from a bakery she knew I liked, the one on Commonwealth that makes the lemon tarts I have loved for 20 years. She had driven 40 minutes. She did not ask for anything. She sat at my kitchen table, and we talked for 2 hours about her job and her life and a man she was cautiously beginning to trust. Before she left, she hugged me at the door for a long time and then stepped back and looked at me and said, "Mama, I am really proud of you." I asked her what she meant. She said, "For figuring out who you are again. I think I forgot for a while that you are a person and not just my mom. I am sorry about that." I held her for another moment. "Baby," I said, "figuring it out is what we do, both of us." Denise sent flowers, beautiful ones, sunflowers and deep orange roses, with a card in her careful accountant's handwriting that said, "I know this year has been hard. I know I made it harder sometimes. I love you more than I know how to say. I am working on it, more soon." That was enough. That was more than enough. That was, in fact, more than I had received in years, not in dollar value, but in the only currency that ever actually mattered. I retired from Piedmont General the following spring, 42 years after I had started as an administrative assistant who reorganized the filing system on her own time. My colleagues threw me a small party in the conference room with a sheet cake and a card signed by everyone in the building. My manager said in her speech that I was the most quietly effective person she had ever worked with, that I made everything around me function better just by being present, and that the office would not be the same without me. I thought about that word quietly and how long I had operated in that register, doing the work without making noise about it, smoothing things over without anyone noticing the smoothing. I was glad I had been effective. I was glad, for once, that the word was past tense. I sold the house on Clover Street the following fall. Not because I had to, I could have stayed, but because I chose to. The house had been Robert and me together, and then Robert and me and the children, and then just me rattling around in rooms that held more memory than present-tense life. I wanted, for the first time in my adult life, a space that was entirely and only mine, chosen by me, scaled to my actual life, not inherited from a previous chapter. I sold the house for considerably more than we had paid for it, and I used a portion of the proceeds to solidify my retirement, and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment downtown with a balcony that overlooked a small park and a kitchen that had a window over the sink, the kind I had always wanted, that let in the morning light in long rectangles across the floor. I planted tomatoes in containers on the balcony. They are not as large as the garden on Clover Street, but they are mine in a way that garden never quite was, because I tend them for myself, for the pure satisfaction of watching something grow under my care without anyone needing it to be anything other than what it is. Tomatoes in August, warm from the sun, eaten standing on the balcony over the park. That is a thing I do now. It is a small thing and it is entirely mine. I have been asked by people who know my story whether I regret what I gave my children, whether I am angry at them, whether I feel, looking back across those 14 years, that I was taken advantage of. My answer is always the same, and it is complicated and it is true. Yes and no, and also neither. Yes, I regret that I gave so much money that it endangered my own security. That was not love, that was fear. Fear of not being needed. Fear of being the kind of mother who was not there when her children struggled. Fear that if I said no, I would lose them, as if love were a transaction that could be canceled by a single refusal. That fear cost me nearly $200,000 and years of my own life that I spent worrying about other people's problems, while my back hurt and my garden went to seed and New Orleans waited. No, I do not regret loving them. I do not regret the wedding or the tuition or the nights I sat up worrying. Those were real. Those were mine. Love is not made less real by being misdirected, and I was never not their mother, not for a single day of those 14 years, no matter what the money situation was. And neither regret nor vindication, because the truth is more textured than either of those positions. The truth is that I was a woman who had been taught that her value was in her usefulness, and I lived that teaching so completely that it nearly erased me. And then something cracked open, a birthday that no one called, a piece of paper with numbers on it, a question I finally asked myself at 60, and I started to come back. Not back to who I was before. Back to who I actually was, underneath everything I had spent a lifetime performing for everyone else. My name is Carol Jean Hutchins. I am 65 years old. I live in a downtown apartment with a balcony and a tomato garden and a window over the sink that fills with morning light. I have a pension and a savings account that grows slowly and steadily because nobody is taking from it anymore. I have 3 children who are, each in their own way and at their own pace, learning what it means to be in a relationship with a person rather than a resource. I have a best friend named Beverly who calls me every Sunday and who flew to New Orleans with me and who is already planning where we go next. I have a therapist named Dr. Ose who has helped me understand why I gave so much and what I was looking for when I gave it and how to look for it differently now. I have a back that does not hurt anymore. I have been to New Orleans, and I am going to Portugal in the spring and Rome the year after that, God willing, as my mother used to say. And I want to say one last thing, for every woman reading this who recognizes herself in my story. The woman who gives and makes herself small and waits for a phone that does not ring. I want to say this to her directly, plainly, the way Beverly said it to me on that balcony in Asheville when I finally told the truth out loud. You are not a floor. You are not a resource. You are not a safety net or a bank account or an emergency contact or a problem to be solved by giving more. You are a woman with a life of your own, and that life is not a leftover. It is not what remains after everyone else's needs have been met. It is the whole thing. It is the point. It is what all of it was supposed to be for. Take care of yourself first, not because you do not love them, but because the truest, deepest, most lasting love you can give the people in your life is the love that comes from a woman who is whole, not a woman who has given everything away and has nothing left to give. A woman who has kept enough for herself to still be standing, still be present, still be real. That woman, the whole one, the standing one, the real one, is who your people actually need. Even if it takes them a while to understand that. Even if the birthday phone does not ring for another year or 2 while everyone adjusts. She is worth the wait. You are worth the wait. Happy birthday, Carol.